Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome back to House of Footy. It's your boy Ray, and tonight I've got Mac joining me. Welcome, Mac.
Good evening.
On today's podcast, we are going to be reviewing this past weekend's Premier League games, and we'll also briefly touch on the upcoming Champions League games. Before we get into it, don't forget to follow us on our social media, both on X and Instagram. Our handle is at @houseof_footy. Also, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to us. We are on both Spotify and YouTube. And lastly, feel free to get in touch with us via email. We love hearing from you guys, and we want you guys getting involved. Our email is houseoffooty@hotmail.com. Let's get straight into the action. We're going to take things a little bit differently today. We're going to discuss firstly the title race as a whole. So that, of course, includes numerous teams. And I'll just read out some of the most pressing results regarding the title race. First, we have Liverpool 3-1 Burnley. We also have Man City 2, Everton 0, and West Ham 0, Arsenal 6. So right off the bat, any game, doesn't matter in any particular order, Mac, anything stand out to you from these three results?
Personally, maybe this is a little bit biased, but I have to zero in on Arsenal's 6-0 win away at West Ham. A couple of different reasons. So far this season, Arsenal had lost 2 games at West Ham. They were 0-2 against their London rivals. So for them to be able to go and get a resounding win of that margin, which they have not done at that stadium away from home, was absolutely vital for a couple of different reasons. One, it got them back, continuing along their winning ways, where since really the turn of the new year, we've seen more of an evolution of the club, quite a few changes. In addition, with that margin of victory, one of the biggest factors that come into many title races and many positions through the Premier League is goal difference. And that put them right on level with Manchester City and one behind Liverpool. So really, it's all about the points and how the rest of the season plays out after this weekend. So even though the rivals also did pick up wins, I felt like Arsenal's win had that little bit of oomph, that little bit of extra exclamation point, given the margin of result and the standard of play. I feel like going into that game, a lot of people may have picked up, okay, if Arsenal are going to kind of fall off this title race, away draw potentially at a West Ham team where you feel like it's difficult to break them down. That could have been the script that was laid out. Arsenal definitely subverted that, came out, scored goals very quickly, very often. At one point, they scored, I think it was 3 goals in a matter of 6 minutes. So they really kind of just shell-shocked West Ham and took them out of the game from the jump. And West Ham really couldn't get back in. I think if you look over, and even on the other side of the ball, the defensive side is where over their last 2 games, they've only had 2 shots on target against them. So defensively, they've been resolute as well. So overall, another, I guess, star plus performance from Arsenal. And this definitely, even though I think most people would generally agree that they're probably the 3rd favorite for the title, they're still in the conversation. And with these results, other people's opinions may change to them where they may get more considered as one of the favorites versus kind of that 3rd slot. What about you? Is there a particular game, or even do you want to continue about the Arsenal topic? What are your thoughts?
I think we should just continue with the Arsenal topic. For sure, you were mentioning, of course, some great stats there. Arsenal, right off their quote-unquote winter break, 4 out of 4 in terms of the Premier League. I'm just going to add this up: 11, 14, 15 goals for, and 2 goals against. Amazing going forward, as we just saw in a 6-0 win away from home. And defensively, like you said, 2 goals in the last 4 games against, and 2 shots on target in the last 2 games against teams that you would argue are, of course, in the top half of the table. And in Liverpool, probably on their day, one of the most fierce offenses in the league and even in the world. To be able to keep them at 1 shot on target in 90 minutes is very, very impressive, to say the least. And of course, we're just gonna have we're gonna have to go on for a long time giving them positives in terms of individual players if we can for Arsenal. But just gonna quickly put it to you guys. Of course, Saka, we have to mention it, 100 goals and assists at 22 for Arsenal. Simply amazing. You can definitely tell he is on his way, if not already considered a world-class player. And I would not just say a winger, I would say player, because of the way he can step into different roles at certain times, although we haven't seen it as much. That just goes to show how well drilled this Arsenal team is, even when he's quote-unquote isolated on the wing. he's still able to deliver when needed. And to that, a bigger point is everyone looks comfortable on this Arsenal team. There's a lot of changes that come through. Of course, there's been numerous injuries, but in this game, Leandro Trossard starts up in striker. Kai Havertz plays as the left center mid, and QER, who we haven't really seen much, doesn't miss a step at all in a left back position, which I haven't. I'm going to be completely honest. I haven't really watched him, but he's able to slot into I would say, quote unquote, unnatural position. But because the system, it's worked out so well, any player can really just step in and play that role, to the point that El came on in this game. I saw him take a shot in one of the highlights, and I'm like, who's this? Is this a young player coming through? No, it's Mohamed El-Nani, but there is another player that came through. I think it was Nwari from Arsenal. So, again, just very, very positive there. Mac, any specific standout performances from this game for you?
Again, the standout performance, I think, again, for me, has to be Declan Rice. And something that you had asked me, I think, individually in our chat, watching the Arsenal versus Liverpool game, is about Declan Rice taking corner kicks. Where if you look pre-break towards after break, and something that, because I had noticed it over the last couple of games, and I took a look at stat where I noticed that prior to the break, he only had taken 3 corner kicks prior to then, and since then in 4 games he's taken 12. All have been from the left hand side, where you have the in-swingers trying to be able to get onto that goalkeeper and put that pressure on, and now he's even taking some dead balls to be able to cross to the box. As like a 6'2" lad, you would expect him to be in the box, to be able to get on, lash on the headers. But prior to then, maybe that's not a forte of his, maybe that's not a skill that he has, because even prior to then, during corner kicks, he would be like the last man back applying coverage. Kind of the meme of it, and really is stipulated when that previous Liverpool matchup, when he was the last man back after a corner mishap, right? So that change, that adjustment, because he had taken it them previously actually at West Ham, where maybe this is a skill that he could bring into Arsenal and kind of highlight and show a little bit more. And you kind of notice where Arsenal so far this year, of their just over 50 goals, I think 15 or 16 of them have come from set pieces. So it's been a heavy reliance on them from both their center halves, where they're just not kind of getting up there as, oh, okay, you're the center half, I guess you're going to go in for a corner. No, they're both area threats, especially Gabriel, where they're able to apply pressure on defenses. They're able to call it a little bit of mayhem, get that dirty, gritty goal, where previous years from Arsenal title challenges, they really didn't have. It was more, okay, we're going to silk our way through. They have the capability to do that, but with the ability to do this as well, it adds a different evolution, a different option in their tool belt. So great to see him individually get to show that off, where a lot of people wouldn't have anticipated that be a key feature of his skill set applied with this Arsenal team. So that's definitely a standout for me. Absolutely. In addition, I think you were highlighted, and I'm going to give him flowers as well. Saka, that second goal after the penalty, I think just like you said, 100 goals and assists. It's 50 goals, the youngest player in Arsenal colors to reach that landmark. So overall, fantastic for that. And the way he took that second goal just to be able to kind of give Areola the eyes and just kind of slam it in your post. Seems like it's all coming together with reinforcements coming back. Tomiyasu just signed a new contract. Jurriën Timber seems to be in training. Zinchenko's oft injured anyway, so if he's away for a week, no one's surprised. So again, it looks like things are rounding in form to Arsenal. They just need, of their next couple of games, they're facing, I don't mean to be rude in some ways, but they have, let's call it, a lighter schedule than most, where I would argue over the next 4 or 5 games, they need to continue to take massive points, where they're at Burnley, at home to Newcastle, at Sheffield United, and that or home to Brentford before they face Chelsea at home, which I would feel like they need to get maximum points across that entire stretch or close to, because their counterparts, the Man Cities, the Liverpools, are not going to really slip up. And that puts them into the Manchester City fixture towards the end of March. So if you're in a good string or run of form, you've knocked out 6-7 wins after this, you're on a 10-game winning streak, you go into the Etihad with full confidence, who knows what happens, right? So I feel like this is just the first leg of their stretch of run that they need to go on, with the Champions League picking up back up. That may be a little bit more difficult, but I feel like they do potentially have that run in them. But I feel like we spent a lot of time about Arsenal. I guess for you, Ray, moving on to either the City or the Liverpool side of this, is there, I guess, maybe a standout performance or a key takeaway that maybe you've noticed over the course of this weekend, that you feel, okay, maybe this does shake up the title race a little bit, or change your feelings about either of these teams?
So we Yeah, let's move on to, I guess, Liverpool now. They got a 3-0 win at home to Burnley in a game where Liverpool didn't start, you could argue, well at all. It looked like Burnley should have been in front earlier on in the game. Liverpool then, of course, at home will continue to dominate possession and eventually creep in and sort of gain yardage in the opponent's half. Eventually get their goal through Diogo Jota, but Darryl O'Shea gets an equalizer for Burnley, I believe from a corner. So it goes into the into half time at 1-1. And then Jurgen Klopp changes it up with sort of bringing off Trent Alexander-Arnold, who you could say has been hooked for 2 of the last games that he's played fairly early into the game, and introduced Curtis Jones more as a right back. Harvey Elliott was pushed into that midfield position, and it really screamed. It's a need that really helped out Liverpool in this game. The midfield was simply not there. It was Endo, McAllister, and Curtis Jones to start off, and then with Curtis Jones, which you would sort of argue Trent has the ability to. Maybe he is still sort of feeling the effects from coming off an injury. Curtis Jones is able to fill in as a right back, quote unquote, but we all know he's going to be overloading the midfield, and I think that really helped Liverpool gain a stronghold in that game, and ultimately Luis Diaz and Darwin just win the game for Liverpool. And really, the result Liverpool wanted and needed after losing to Arsenal, putting them again first in the Premier League table with Man City's game in hand currently, and really it shows that on their day, Liverpool can sort of can have it all to win the title, but it really is a what type of Liverpool team will we get? And of course, injuries piling on. I'm not sure actually when Mo Salah is coming back. Trent Alexander-Arnold, as we saw, is not fully fit, I would say. And I think you may have highlighted here, there's some also concerns about partnerships in center back with regards to injuries. So maybe I'll let you touch on that.
Yeah, so I have a positive and negative from some injury replacements coming out of this game. Kelleher, for me, goalkeeper-wise for Liverpool, looked great. He made the saves he needed to. He came out with strong in a couple of key moments where I would argue Burnley would feel like, okay, if we were a little bit more clinical, I think the big opportunity, I think it was for Fofana. He had a couple of chances where he should have taken away,
Right.
but he didn't. But Kelleher did a good job of kind of being that substitute goalie, being that backup, stepping in for Alisson, and did a good job. So I want to be able to give him credit there. So that may, even though Alisson definitely is a loss, of course, arguably the best goalkeeper in the world, the best goalkeeper of the last 5-6 years, he is not too bad of a substitute as needed. But for me, Kwanzaa was a little bit of a sore spot where a lot of those errors that led to those chances came from his mistakes. Obviously, that might be he might be playing in that position. I think is one of the most tough positions in world football in a lot of ways because you're under a magnifying glass. I don't mean to be disrespectful or throw shade on Trent Alexander-Arnold whatsoever, but again, as you said, he just come back from injury. He very much vacates into that midfield position. So as a young center half, you now have the whole right side of the pitch really to manage by yourself. That's not an easy task. You have experienced players like Konate or Joel Matip who on their day struggle with that. So being a young player coming in to step into that position is very, very difficult. So I want to be able to give an understanding to that. But at the same time, in those moments, not making the right decisions, caught out Liverpool in a couple of instances where, again, I feel like I wouldn't be surprised if the exact same, I guess, situations play out where if Burnley didn't shoot themselves in the foot a couple of times, they walk out with the point out of this fixture. But credit to them, had good goalkeeping in those key moments, were able to keep at least Burnley to that one goal overall throughout the game, as well as even though they did create a lot of, I guess, shots on target. None of them were really clear-cut and obvious where Trafford, I felt like, had to make an amazing save. It was more so the mistakes they capitalized in. Liverpool are probably one of the best, if not the best in the world of football, making you make those mistakes, putting you in uncomfortable positions, asking key questions. And Burnley kept making the wrong decisions and kept making the wrong choices. Again, for the corner, James Trafford coming out, not making the right decision. One of the defenders should be able to clear it long. Instead, kind of kept it short, and Jota went on to be able to score. So decisions like that just kept biting at this Burnley team, and it seems like it's a constant threat where against one of these big teams like Liverpool, you're hoping for a slice of luck, and you're hoping to play very well, and you're hoping to be able to make sure that you don't make any mistakes. I felt like they were 0-3 on that, and still were decent enough in some areas of the pitch. So overall, great credit for Liverpool for them to, even though we're not playing at the best, even though they're not playing at 100%, come out with the win. But it does leave me asking some questions about if they're facing even a slightly better level of competition than the Burnley team, are those area of the pitch is going to be exposed? It'll be interesting to see. But I think that's until reinforcements come back in, until injuries start to get cleaned up. I think that's the question that they'll have to manage and continually deal with until they do.
That's well put there, and I guess hand in hand with that, we're going to talk about Man City to Everton. No, I guess very similar in the sense that Man City, very similar to the Liverpool, didn't have the greatest first half. You could say very sloppy in certain areas. There was a big rotation in terms of the squad. I think maybe Man City with an eye on their Champions League matchup coming up this week, which we'll probably touch on a little bit later in this podcast, but Man City didn't score until the 71st minute. Erling Haaland, I think it was off of a bounce in the box, gets on off a corner, gets onto the end of that, 1-0. And I hate to say it, but Man City at home, 1-0 that late in the game, it's pretty much wraps. And then, of course, Erling Haaland does what he does, one-on-one against Branthwaite, and I do not envy that job, defending Haaland in that situation, of course. Goes through him and then finishes it off in a game where really they just needed the win. That, of course, brings them to 2 points behind Liverpool with a game in hand. So if they do win their game in hand, they are first mathematically. But really, in all circumstances, 73% possession, 19 shots, 3 shots on target. You could argue there is a question there regarding how clinical they are. They do have Erling Haaland back, scored 2 goals. Is that something that perhaps now that Erling Haaland has scored, they can sort of push to the back of their mind, or is there something else that you want to bring up on that topic, Mac?
Again, it would have to be the Manchester City new boys, and that would be the Doku's and the Mateus Nunes. Those 2 players, it's very interesting for me because they were bought in as kind of reinforcements, backups, reserve squad rotation types of players, where into the previous matchup for Manchester City, you saw Bernardo Silva, Kevin De Bruyne start. They, of course, rested, and they both had to come on to be able to help kind of get City over the line because it wasn't really doing it from those 2 players. And you notice that those were the exact subs for those 2 players, right? It just seems like a natural where, okay, we're going to at least try to keep off at all times 2 of Foden, Bernardo Silva, Kevin De Bruyne, as well as Alvarez on the pitch at all times alongside Haaland. And we're going to be able to hopefully get enough of the line. If I need it, I'll go all in, put all 4 of them out, or 3 or 4 of them out to be able to get across the finish line. And that should just be a bit enough against most Premier League teams. I think if Manchester City, because they are in so many competitions, because they do go deep in so many different competitions, and every game in a lot of ways for them, they're playing against, in most cases, I would say, almost every game, they're facing against a very low block. I feel like Doku and Nunes have struggled against that, where in those tight spaces, maybe they haven't made the right decisions. I think Doku's had a little bit more explosiveness. Nunes, that first touch, Pep has complained about it since coming over, where maybe that's not good enough in those areas of the pitch for them to kind of express themselves and do what they need to do in the final third of the pitch. But if there's an injury again to Kevin De Bruyne, if there's an injury to Bernardo Silva or any of their 4 players, I would say, in that area of the pitch, their drop up for them, I feel like, is a little bit deeper than what we've experienced in previous years, where you could have like a Riyad Mahrez step in, right? Jack Grealish has still kind of been absent, maybe on a drunken stupor for this last so far of the year. Maybe he comes back in and does well. Who knows? But I think that's the area I'm a little bit concerned about, that where as games pile up, City generally do well to be able to manage it. But this is a new City team with a lot of new faces. Are they up to scuff as kind of the people that they replaced over the last couple of years? Still, we'll have to wait and see. But as of right now, that's the area I'm looking at. Because, again, it's great to have a get out of jail free card of Kevin De Bruyne coming on and then setting up a goal for Haaland to kind of close off the game. If there's any injuries there, it's going to be tough for them, I feel like.
That's fair. That's completely fair. And so I guess just to recap then, with regards to these 3 teams, Liverpool currently first, Man City second with a game in hand, and Arsenal tied on points with Man City, but a game behind. Having played an extra game it really does sound like it is still Man City's title to lose at this point, in the sense that we know what we're going to get from them. They still got the win. We know what they have and the experience that they do have coming into the latter part of the season. Liverpool, I think it really depends on like run of form, players available. It's a very hit or miss, especially considering how they did last season. So even though they are in first, you could make a case for or against them. And then it's Arsenal now, great run of form. It's just a matter of, I guess, a different shift. And whereas last year Arsenal were first with sort of having to look behind them, maybe that now with a different sort of circumstance, having to chase. Not as much pressure, I guess, on you in terms of all eyes on you when you're playing games, being chased down, but more so, okay, now we have to come together as a group and chase down the leaders, whoever that might be, that game week. And so, with that being said, with the run of form that they're going, I think it is a good spot for them. It's just a matter of getting the important wins game after game after game now with so those competitions coming fast and thick. So ultimately, do you agree with sort of my overall summarizing of the situation, or do you have something different in mind, Mac?
I think you're undershooting Liverpool a little bit. If you were to ask me to break down what are my odds on, let's say if I split up out of 100% odds on to be able to win the title, it's a coin flip for City. I'd say 50%, sorry. Liverpool 35, Arsenal 15. I think that equals up to 100 if my math is correct. I think that's in and around the ranges I feel like, where everyone's still within a reasonable shell, still has the belief where there is a pathway for them to be able to do it, because these teams face each other. City are the only team that still has to face both Arsenal and Liverpool, and those are the most difficult games on their calendar. I think, yes, maybe both of them are at home, but would I be surprised if they drop points in either or both of those games? No. It's very much possible, as well as I think all three teams still have to face other big teams around them, because there's still plenty of games left in the season. So I still feel like there's going to be a lot of twists and turns. Everyone's in with the shout. I do agree with you, though. City are the favorite, but I don't feel like they have a hand on the trophy, or even, let's say, are in the same room as the trophy yet. Everyone's still trying to get in the room. And those three are the only teams that I would say are still accessible or could get close to it, I feel like.
Yeah, and it's fantastic. All three teams got the win, so that continues to make things interesting for us. So we're going to take a quick break here, guys, and then we'll be back covering some more Premier League action, and then we'll preview some Champions League action. So stay with us, guys. Welcome back to Hustle Footy, guys. We are going to continue our podcast today, now discussing the top 5 battle for European qualification, and just going to read some of the results. Aston Villa 1, Man U 2. Spurs 2, Brighton 1, and Newcastle 3, Nottingham Forest 2. So these are the main teams, I think, it's fair to say, that are sort of challenging for those the last 1 or 2 Champions League spots, and also the other remaining European spots. Out of, I guess, all of these results, all of these teams, Mac, anything stand out to you from this weekend?
When I'm specifically, if we're going to focus both on the Manchester United, Villa, and Spurs Brighton game, it's really the difference between performance versus result-oriented kind of soccer in some ways. What I mean by this is where, if you look at the winners of those games, both Spurs and Manchester United, where I'm looking at Manchester United, that game that they played, were they the better team than Aston Villa? No. They created far fewer chances, weren't really that great, but did just enough to be able to get over the line. And you want to give them certain plaudits for it, where, hey, you've won, but it's tough. It feels like it leaves a tough taste in my mouth. Maybe it's because I'm a little bit of a hater. Who knows? But I think a lot of it is because really their process of how they get their chances, how they become successful, seems so inconsistent and more, maybe a little bit more luck-based in a lot of ways, where they're fortunate, I feel like, to come out with all 3 points, or even in some cases 8 point against that Villa team, versus the Spurs team and how they've won. Really, it's because of their system. It's really their process. It's going to either put them all in or all out. You know how they're going to play. You know how they're going to build up. It's going to create an abundance of opportunities for both teams, but you know how they're going to be successful, and it makes sense. So when I'm comparing and contrasting these teams, I definitely feel like that's representative of where they're on the table, where Spurs seem right now are the favorites for that 4th slot. So at least the guaranteed Champions League qualification as of right now. Of course, a lot of things can still change, whereas Manchester United are a little bit further down the table. And that's why I think it always reminds me when I think of like methodology, process, kind of building out a system is a primary way to success in football, because if everyone's on the same page, kind of pulling on the same rope at the same time, you have a good chance of being successful versus it seems like a hodgepodge of, okay, we can maybe grit this and figure this out together on the fly. So that's the first thing that I've taken away from these round of results. And maybe that gives a little bit of my feeling about where those two teams may finish up. But I guess, what about you? Is there maybe a team you want to pick out, a game you want to pick out from that or from what I talked about?
Honestly, we're going to talk about those two teams, but I guess let me get it out of the way first. Aston Villa are just so inconsistent in my mind now. Just reading their past couple of results, tied Everton in the Premier League, tied Chelsea in the FA Cup, and then eventually lost to them just last week. Lost to Newcastle, but heavily beat Sheffield United heavily, 5-0 away, and then dominate the game for most parts of this game against Man U, but ultimately lose to McTominay, which we'll cover a little bit more later. But yeah, Aston Villa is just so inconsistent at this moment that it just gives me some questions. I do know that they're capable of as we saw early in the season, even achieving achieving that top of the league position. But the run of form that they're in is just very, you could argue, very inconsistent in the sense that I don't really know what we're going to get out of them if things don't go well for them within the first 10-15 minutes of the game. Now, after that, Man U and Spurs, very, very important wins for them to continue for that top four position. And I guess I'll just highlight Man U now. They've had a crazy start to the season, but I feel like I mentioned this last week before I guess now that we do know Lisandro Martinez will miss some time. I didn't really think they would come out of this game with a result, but ultimately they did. And important goals from Hojlund, who gets another goal. I think he now has 5 in 5, if I heard that correctly. Scott McTominay, I just don't understand it, but hey, it's working out for them. He comes on and scores the winner in the 86th minute. But just building out of the back, like I mentioned in our private group chat, if I'm a Man U fan, that takes years off my life, because Onana has one thing ingrained in his mind: I'm going to play short every single time. But Varane and Maguire, as soon as the ball comes to them, they're not really helped by those players around them. And it just breaks down, and then Onana has to force it long, and then Aston Villa either win a throw-in or get a chance to counter them right off of Man United possession. So it just doesn't make sense so far, but getting the wins are what's more important for Man United at the moment. And if I'm not mistaken, that's the first time they won against a team in the top 9 places in the Premier League. So I guess that's a good building block. And I do think because of now fewer competitions, and I guess I'll draw the comparison to Arsenal, where Man U now are out of many competitions. It's only the Premier League now that they really have to focus on. I think they might be also in the FA Cup, but really the Premier League is what they're going to be focusing on. 1 game a week. Can we put a good run now and really just focus on making a good end to the season? Currently, they are sitting... Sorry, I just had it here. They're currently sitting 6th, but with a 0 goal difference. So no goals in terms of goals against and goals for. It's the same number, and it's just crazy to me that that's still the fact. That's still the case, and they currently still sit 6th in the table, only 6 points behind Tottenham, who are 4th. So very interesting to me there. Anything else I'm missing from Man U or maybe Aston Villa here, Mac?
So Villa, for one, if we were to start off, I think that we have to ask ourselves, have they been found out? They've lost 3 of the last 6 games, where they've only lost 3 of the first 18 games so far in the Premier League season. So it's been a quite precipitous drop in form where, again, we saw consistent, strong play, but like I said, have they been found out? Where it seems like the archetype of player that can beat them is a pacey winger with a lot of skill, be able to get him behind. Where you see a player like Anthony Gordon or Garnacho doing the exact same thing over and over again to Matty Cash on that left hand side, and I'm curious to see it, because even in those games, they're creating enough chances themselves. So offensively, I feel like they have enough between Diaby, Bailey, Watkins. They're going to have enough to be a consistent threat. But defensively, for me, is where the step back has been, where they can get continuously exposed in that area of the pitch, behind the Matty Cash, behind the Morenos on the other side as well, where if you can break their press, if you can break their high line, you're going to be able to feast off the opportunities where I would argue some of the central halves don't have the pace to have the recovery, or because the wide backs provide so much of the width for the team, there isn't really enough time for them to be able to get back and recover. So if teams have started to figure that out, just like last year, Unai Emery, when he first came in, I would argue, I think it was like 18, 19 games that he managed. For their first 14, they looked unplayable in a lot of areas, but they started to get found out as well, where they need that second trigger. They need that next second step. They need that extra level of, okay, we can change the game up a little bit, play this a little bit different way to throw off the opponent, where it isn't such an easy game plan, I feel like, going in against them. Be interested to see how they address that going forward, because to take a step back, this win was absolutely vital for not just Manchester United, but also for a team that we'll maybe talk about a little bit later, Newcastle, because this was, if Aston Villa had gone on to win this game, it would have been clear, in my opinion, where it's either Spurs or Villa finishing in that 4 spot, because this would have been an 11-point difference between these two teams. Now we're exiting it with a 5-point difference. So even though I would still argue Manchester United are a little bit further away from it, they have a lot more questions, because when you look at the results have been decent and have been very good recently, but the performances still haven't been great, in my opinion. Before they were looking outside and kind of being that person walking down the street looking at other people's house at the top 4. Now that they've slightly gone up to the door and opened it a little bit. The door's not open. They're not that close yet, but they have the potential to get in there if they continue to pick up results like this, off performance to start to heap and get better, and so they grow by leaps and bounds. Because I think one of the key points you talked about is where it seems like behind the scenes with Ineos coming in, where Ten Hag has really only been focused that you're just a coach. Even though you're the manager, you don't have to worry about PR, you're not worried about transfers, you're not worried about other stuff. You're just a coach. Focus on that. And if he's able to wrap his arms around that for the rest of the season with all these extra training sessions that they have because they're out of competitions, it should give them a position to be very successful.
Yeah, another team that I'm just going to briefly mention, you did mention them already, are Spurs. I read, of course, online they are the only side to win both win 15 plus points from losing positions, but also to lose 15 plus points from winning positions in the Premier League. So it just shows you how crazy their swings are, and it's not more shown than this game against Brighton, where they go down in the first half through a penalty kick. I think it was Danny Welbeck who was brought down, and then Pape Matar Sarr equalizes from should have been a easy square ball through. I think it was Lewis Dunk that hits it off the post and then bounces back to Sarr, who has had a phenomenal season so far, and then Son, who did come on in the second half, ices it for Brendan Johnson, squares it through, and they get the win ultimately, very, very late in the game. But it was a very back and forth game, so for neutrals, it would have been a fantastic one to watch. I personally think it's a little bit too open for my liking, and so I do understand that Spurs, this is the game system that they're going to play, and whether it's going to be executed to perfection that's going to work, or they're just going to get another one of those Chelsea games where it doesn't work for them, they may lose heavily time and time again after being found out from there. So interesting there. But I guess lastly, did you want to just touch on Newcastle? They were 3-2 winners against Nottingham Forest this past weekend. What were your takes there, Mac?
I think they did just enough on that end where you saw Bruno Guimaraes, sorry, my blank there. Bruno Guimaraes come in, step up, score 2 fantastic goals. The first one with just the outside of the foot, and then just inside the box from across, and then being able to curl in his second effort to be able to get them back above that 3-2 lead. I think I'll be honest with you. I know I hop around this individual a lot, where you're just seeing Dan Burn get cooked over and over, week in, week out again. It's not a good look, brother. It's not a good look. I apologize. He's probably a great guy, probably a great lad, but it's a tough look out there when Nottingham Forest is kind of Elanga's cooking you, right? Who got on the score sheet. So overall, they still, I feel like, aren't the final form of their team, but they're doing enough to stay in the conversation. Where even though, and we're talking about this before the podcast, like who realistically is in this race, even though Brighton, sure, West Ham are close on points with them, okay. I really feel like if it's not the only team that can break in towards the, let's say, the middle half of the table into a European qualification spot is this Newcastle team, because we've seen them do it before last year. When they are at 100% health, they are a good team and they have qualities that some teams in the Premier League definitely are envious of. They're not there yet, and they still have some of the mistakes at the back that's kind of costing them, where this should have comfortably been potentially a 2 or 3-0 win versus it being a 3-2 win. Still just enough. They're not out of it yet, but they are, of course, being on 36 points. They have the finest of margins, and they can't let any mistakes go on, because they need every point desperately to get closer and closer back into that conversation with the top 4/5.
Yeah, and it looks like teams are in and around them very critical. Last year, we saw, we're not even have to mention them. Chelsea did win on the day, but they're not really part of the conversation. West Ham had a very poor season. Spurs, we all know sort of what happened with them, and Man U, of course, last season. So, and of course, Liverpool as well. So I think teams dropped off significantly last season, allowing Newcastle to get into the top four. Whereas this year around, it looks like Newcastle are faltering themselves, and Spurs, Aston Villa, and to a point, and I'm going to stick by this, I think Man U have a chance to get into the top four, and so all these teams in and around them are picking up points and sort of gathering form to make it more difficult for Newcastle. So that's something that we'll keep an eye out for towards the end of the season. But more importantly, we'll move on to something that's taking place this week, Mac, and that's, of course, the Champions League returning. That's huge because we have a couple, we'll cover in general, but we have a couple games taking place this week. Copenhagen versus Manchester City, RB Leipzig versus Real Madrid, PSG versus Real Sociedad, and Lazio versus Bayern. Now, I can read out the remaining fixtures, but I think we all know there seems to be a clear favorite in all of these matchups, other than Napoli and Barca, as you mentioned here. Out of, I guess, all 8 fixtures, though, Mac, is there any specific fixture that really stands out to you in terms of maybe a potential upset from these fixtures? What do you think?
I'll be honest with you. The ones that are happening this week, no. I don't think there's... I would be surprised if we get something close to entertaining out of these 4 games. I think there is a clear favorite, not by just a small margin, but quite a wide margin. So no disrespect to Real Sociedad, Lazio, RB Leipzig, or Copenhagen. I think that it's great that you made this far. Kudos. That's all I got for you. This is the end of the road. Who knows? I get to really tee something up. You have to have a first leg that comes out with a tie or comes out with them in a favorite position to make that second leg interest and to apply pressure on that team. Because I feel like all of those other 4 teams may come into this a little bit more lightly, where they may feel, okay, you know what? We'll probably win this. We won't have to necessarily play our full squad the entire time, even though it is the start of the Champions League knockout rounds. I think the only team, if you were to ask me and actually press me, and if I have to make a decision, is probably the PSG Real Sociedad game. Not particularly because Real Sociedad, because if you asked me to name their starting 11, I probably couldn't. The main reason why is in regards to PSG, where through the group stage, they were lucky to be able to get in, as well as a lot of their players, I feel like, are newer to the team. There isn't, let's say, an ingrained Champions League starting 11 that's been there, done that. Like the previous team that took them to the finals, there isn't a whole lot of remnants from that team, where there's been a lot of turnover, as well as the questions with Mbappe. If they get knocked out early in this round, I think that becomes their sole focus for the rest of the season versus seeing what they can scrape together in League as well as the Champions League. So if I had to pick one, it's them. But again, I probably wouldn't. But the later matchups, I think, are a lot more fun. But we'll probably talk about that at a different podcast.
Yeah, I guess
what about you?
Very much on the same train of thought as you, but one fixture does stand out to me slightly. RB Leipzig versus Real Madrid. Now, hear me out. On their day, if both teams are full strength, I think Real Madrid should have enough to go through. But this past week, Real Madrid cemented themselves as the clear La Liga favorites after beating Girona 4-0. But a big injury occurred. Jude Bellingham picked up an ankle injury, will be out for several weeks. Now, not certain what that means in terms of their return fixture at the Bernabeu. Of course, the first game is going to take place at RB Leipzig, so it could really go either way. But if RB Leipzig are, and that's a very big if, RB Leipzig are very well defensively and hit Real Madrid on the break, as we sort of expect them to do, as they've done against most very numerous teams, and sort of can definitely have that impact. They do have those players that can sort of hurt you on the counter, and Real Madrid missing Jude Bellingham, though he's not the main striker, he did have 2 goals in their last game against Girona, and has been really pulling a lot of the weight in terms of goal scoring. If Vinicius and Rodrigo, who if they don't really have a link-up player, and I don't really expect Joselu or even Brahim Diaz to play that vital role, it could be interesting if Leipzig really come out of that tie with a win. And really, if I'm RB Leipzig, I'm putting it all on this game. See if we can get at Real Madrid early in terms of frustrating them and then getting chances, get a lead, and then at the Bernabeu, defend for your lives. If Bellingham is not fit enough to play for that, then it's really an upset, but there's a game plan for beating Real Madrid. Whereas if Real Madrid do score a couple in this game against Leipzig, it's really a wrap, because the matchup at the Bernabeu will just be essentially a practice game. I would say, no disrespect, but really this doesn't have this game might not seem like it has a lot riding to it, but I think actually it is very important for the Real Madrid fans, because the Liga is kind of pretty much sealed unless Real Madrid do make a big mistake. It's really now the Champions League that they're focusing on, and if they do get out, people will definitely be asking questions. Champions League is really what the Real Madrid fans want to win year in, year out. So that's something that they'll be looking at. But yeah, any other, I guess, interesting matchups or narratives or stories that you really want to pick out from these remaining fixtures, Mac?
The last piece, I guess, if we were to give quickly, just to talk about Bayern, because they did lose, of course, to Bayer Leverkusen over the course of the weekend, with them remaining undefeated. And I think now this puts them 5 points off the first place spot in Bundesliga. So the conversation immediately goes to most Premier League fans. Hey, Harry Kane, Eric Dyer still going without a title. If that's the case, they maybe more of the eggs are in the Champions League basket right now for them. Again, obviously, I don't think that they're going to give up. Of course, with the Bundesliga season, there's still a lot of twists and turns that could take place, even though Bayer Leverkusen's season has thus far been phenomenal. Who knows how long it may continue, but I think with that loss, this puts a lot of pressure for them to come in this game with a heavy response. That's why, again, I'm a little bit more worried about Lazio pulling out any type of performance, because I expect Bayern to be at their cutthroat best, as they need to be, considering they just took an L and they need to go back to winning ways. Otherwise, if they go trophyless, I wonder who the Germans would blame. It would be very interesting to see.
Yeah, no, exactly. And yeah, very much how we talk about Man City facing a team after a poor result. I fear for Lazio it could get ugly if Bayern are firing as they normally should. So we'll definitely keep an eye out on that, and we'll definitely cover that in our next podcast. But that means that we conclude our podcast for today. If you guys like what you heard, please like and subscribe to us on our social medias. That's at @house_of_footy. If you have any comments, suggestions, or general banter, get in touch with us via email as well, houseoffooty@hotmail.com. Next time you hear from us will be later this week, when we cover the Champions League games that take place this midweek, and we'll also preview the upcoming Premier League games next time around. So until then, Mac, thank you for joining us.
Peace out.
And see you guys soon.